So again, welcome back. We appreciate you all being here, and we had some really great conversations yesterday that came out of the sessions. And I think Ashley and I, after having some more conversations at dinner last night, realized that this morning we'd really like to just open the floor back up to you all, so we can kind of continue those conversations, because I know there were still some questions. New questions that kind of came up after, people kind of gave what we talked about yesterday some more thought. So we, again, would just kind of like to continue that dialogue with you all this morning for a little bit.
Who has that question they've just been thinking about all night?
Thank you. I just wanted, and I actually brought this up with Dale at the breakfast this morning, hearing about his research and vibrations with crating. What materials that we have now to help lessen the vibration? Oh.
Mood lighting.
I mean, it's really my Jedi mind tricks. What materials that are available now for crating and transport can we use to help lessen vibrations? Because obviously there's a lot of technology that might be coming down the road in the near future, but until then, what can we do?
Can I use the whiteboard? Is this an interesting question? Should I just do some illustrations? And there are other people, obviously, who are good creators in the room, so. Yeah, of course.
One thing that I think we can do right away is make sure that everyone who's building and packing crates is using a cushioning curve calculator to determine the appropriate amount of foam. We still see so many crates come to us with loans in them that are fully lined with ethafoam, and this is doing a disservice to the object, but also we estimate we could probably save between 50 and 75% of ethafoam from being used, which is saving money, better protecting the art, and saving petroleum products from going into landfill. Cushioning curve calculator. The Canadian Conservation Institute has a free one, PadCAD, and I know Chris Barber at Crozier with Packin is trying to develop another one that's more user-friendly for people who build and pack crates.
Yep. So I also use the cushioning curves. The cushioning curves, by the way, were originally set up by the military, right? They're a military standard. I've modified it a little bit to try and improve performance. And I'll just show you what I do. So, but I would say the first thing you can do is to put a finger on the bell. And what I mean by that is that when it comes to vibration, right? If you imagine your object, whatever it is, painting, sculpture, ceramic, glass, is a bell that's ringing, right? And we've all rung the bell. Did I talk about this yesterday? Right, so when you put a finger on the bell, you damp the bell. When you put a finger on the bell, we all know that it doesn't ring as loud, same note, but it's kind of muffled, and then it goes back to being silent faster, right? So that's what vibration damping is. That's the best way to control it, and it's really necessary. Otherwise, it's like a car with no shock absorbers. It hits a bump, and it just keeps going up and down and up and down. So damping is the most important thing. So just to use an example. Everybody see that? Okay, so let's imagine this is a painting in a frame, right? So what we found is that these areas, the corners of a stretcher or the corners of a frame, are the most rigid part of the structure. And so when you look at an object, whatever it is that you are going to pack, you have to provide that object with enough cushioning so that it can withstand an equal and opposite force, right? We're all sitting in our chairs, and we're not falling through the floor because the floor is constructed so that at each leg of the chair, it's pushing up just as much as we're pushing down, equal and opposite force. So think about what parts of your object have that capacity, and it comes down to surface area, pounds per square inch. We're just trying to figure out pounds per square inch, right? So the total force that an object's going to get, it's going to get really boring, but you've all seen this, is mass times acceleration, right? You can't change the mass of your object, but if you want to lower the force, you can control acceleration. So if you slow acceleration, right? So that's what cushions do, is they take something that comes to an immediate stop and they cushion it so that it comes to a very slow stop. So that energy is dispersed over a longer period of time. So you're just, acceleration is meters per second per second. And so you're trying to extend the seconds. That's all you're trying to do. So pick out the most rigid part. Make sure that you have surface area that can withstand an equal and opposite force. And the way I do that is that everything we do is based on weight of the object. Not necessarily size, but weight. What is the mass of the object, okay? So the weight of an object is the mass, so weight equals the mass times the acceleration of gravity, 9.811 meters per second per second. So that's what we all weigh, that's what the object weighs, okay? And then when it's moving, that changes the acceleration, so that changes the mass. So this is equal to 1g. 2 g's is twice the weight, so when something gets bumped on a truck and it receives a 2g acceleration, either up, down, sideways, or all over the place, it's going to have twice the weight that it has, and that's going to be taken up by those cushions, right? So what we do is that we create a box within a box. So always a travel box. Our travel boxes right now are made out of gator foam, fairly rigid, styrene core, paper face. We don't use wood for the inner box in most cases. But we create a cushion at each corner. And those cushions on the corner on the inner box are set up so that they will take an acceleration. So, and there's a cushion on the front and the back. So if you can see through that, right? So we've got front, back, and all the sides at the stiffest parts. Those cushions are calculated to receive an acceleration that's in the range of what normal art handling in a truck receives. So about 2 to 5 Gs, 2 to 5 times the acceleration over the surface area. So that's how we pick out what foam to use and how much foam to use. In other words, how much of a surface area we're going to cover. So essentially we take what's called the IFD, the deflection number of each foam has a deflection number in which it will compress 10%, compress 25%, and then compress 50%. And after 50%, most foams don't compress much more. So what we do is we say, okay, we want the foam to compress when we hit about 5 Gs. We want that foam to start to compress 25%, which means at static weight, it won't compress at all, which is a good thing. But at 5 Gs, it'll begin to compress 25%. At 6 to 7 Gs, it'll compress even more. And then in the crate, so then there's an inner box. And then in the inner box to the crate, we have another set of cushions at the corners of the travel box, because the corners of the travel box are the most rigid part of the travel box. So notice, no cushions in the middle. And the reason why is that the middle of any surface, whether it's front, back, or side, vibrates the most, moves the most. It's like a drum head. So you don't want to cushion and support the object there. You want to support it at its most rigid areas, right? And these corner cushions that hold the inner box are then designed to hold a greater acceleration. In the case of the crate tipping over, falling off the truck, a big one, right? Something on the order of anywhere from 10 to 25 Gs acceleration. And it's usually taken up by, at least in our experiments, at least 3 cushions, sometimes more. So one cushion never absorbs the whole shock. It's really multiple cushions. Otherwise, these cushions would get enormous, right? If you were trying to slow down like a 50G acceleration. And then the other thing, the key thing is the damping, as I said before. So instead of the object sliding perfectly in between these opposing pads, they are under compression. So we're pre-tensioning that object in there. So in other words, it doesn't just slide in. If an object slides into your crate easily, whether it's your inner box sliding in easily or the object sliding into the inner box easily, it's going to have random vibration, and it's going to move an incredible amount. If you put, say, 3/8 of an inch compression here, so that these pads are actually slightly deflected in the opposing directions, right? Then you're damping. So then it can't move freely in that space. It's under a little bit of compression. And if you do that, you've got the finger on the bell. And that restricts enough motion. You have to compress the pad to get it in. You have to compress the pad to get it out. I don't want to say it doesn't feel as easy. You know, you don't feel like it's the custom shoe fit because you're trying to get that compression. That's as good as I can make our standard crate. And jump in if other people have had similar experiences or different experiences.
Dale, I have a follow-up. So currently, how extensively are you using these crates with the O'Keefe Works?
So we're using the same thing as you all are using right now, right? We're using standard outer wood crate, heat-treated pine battens, plywood walls, Marvel Seal lining, right? So a vapor barrier lining on the whole interior, 2 inches of PU foam, polyurethane foam, as insulation on all the walls, front and back, so there's a full layer of 2-inch insulation, and then 2 inches of corner pads, so 2-inch thick corner pads. The one thing we did start doing that we saw in Europe that seems to help is that we'll put a layer of rebond, which looks like carpet padding, right? It's just chunks of different urethanes that are put into a 1-inch thick pad. And we will put that between the 2-inch insulation layer and then those corner pads. And the idea there is that anything that's made up of a variety of materials, different densities with air in between, will not transmit vibration as a continuous foam would. And it does seem to help, a small amount, like 2 to 5% in transmitted vibration, but it helps. Yeah.
Could you talk about some of those, and are any of the things that you mentioned just now serviceable?
Not really. I mean, the thing about foams, right, is that they do their job by sort of collapsing their cell structure, because they're all made up of a whole bunch of little cells, and those cell structures collapse, and then they rub over each other, and they generate heat. And what they're doing is they're changing kinetic energy into thermal energy. So if you ever want a great test, right, just, not with an artwork inside, but if you have a crate that's loaded with a facsimile, we do this, and you can do it on a shaker table, and just as soon as it gets off the truck, open it up and feel the pads, and the pads are warm. And where the object is touching the pad, it's warm. And it's warm because when those pads are absorbing energy, they're heating up. The trouble is that heat and that motion breaks those cells down. And so they lose their resiliency. They start getting compression set more and more and more. So PU foams, ethifoams, they may last a year, a little bit more than a year, but then if you've got a 2-year show, those pads are not going to be doing what they did when you first designed them. So when I'm talking about serviceable materials, I'm talking about industrial materials. I'm talking about shock absorbers, cables, pulleys, things that are made to operate continuously over many, many years that can be replaced. And so that's the crate that we've been working on now. We've gone sort of completely away from wire rope isolators and foams and cushions, and we now have literally a kind of shock absorber. It's called a multi-stage isolator, and the idea is that there's one spring system inside the shock absorber that damps and de-energizes small vibration frequencies, and then bigger isolators, bigger springs that absorb like a major collision. right? And then the damping is achieved by the cabling that goes to the inner box. Yeah. This makes sense? So I would say, if there's anything you can do, it is to figure out how you can achieve and adopt the cushioning curves using those IFDs, the 25%, take the weight of your object, determine what parts of your object will hold an equal and opposite force. That's like so critical. It's all pounds per square inch. So if it's too much for a little area, expand your area, your surface area of contact, so that you're getting a PSI, pounds per square inch, and talk to a conservator. How much force does this need to take, right? And then create a surface area, and then just damp the whole system. Pre-tension it with a little bit of compression. And if you're attaching accelerometers and data loggers to your objects, you're going to see a major improvement in the degree of vibration.
Dale, this sounds so good when you tell us about it. But when I think about going back to work and like weighing each painting that we're gonna send out on loan, we
Yep.
don't have a dedicated staff member. We have lots of different registrars and preparators with their hands and making great recommendations. I'm wanting a practical guide, or what is the middle ground between just defaulting to ordering our regular travel crate from our go-to fabricators and weighing every object? How can we get a little bit better while still making it sustainable for our workflow?
Yeah, I can't solve staffing problems. Because that's really what we're talking about here, right? I think you do have to know the weight of every single object. If you're going to move it, how it responds to shocks and vibrations is completely dependent upon how the weight of the object is matched to the foams that are supporting it. If you have a piece of PU foam, and you can do this, just go to your own crate, right? So PU foam has an IFD 25%, that is, it will compress 25% with a force that's, it's somewhere around 2 pounds per square inch, right? So take your thumb, about a square inch of surface area, and push gray foam in your cushion and try and deflect it 25%. And you can feel it. It's about 2 pounds, doesn't take much. Then increase the surface area by using the whole palm of your hand. So now you're talking about 10 square inches instead of 1 square inch. And just try and do the same thing with the palm of your hand, and it won't compress. You have to really push to compress that foam, right? So if you've got a continuous piece of foam and you're supporting something lightweight, you might as well just write it on a piece of steel, because that foam is not going to compress. It's going to be literally just like a piece of steel. There will be no cushioning there at all. So you've got to match the surface area with the IFD and to the mass of your object. You have got to, registrars, you're writing down dimensions. We've been doing that for 150 years. You got to start writing down weights as well. It's really important, because that's what you're trying to do, is you're trying to take that weight, take that mass, imagine it accelerating in a transit situation, and then cushioning that so it'll get there safely. Got to have mass. So if you're truly interested, or if your staff is truly interested, send me an email. I've got an Excel spreadsheet where you can sort of enter the mass and determine the inner box cushions. One thing I can't tell is if you're going to use our travel boxes, which start out mostly as being gator foam. If you're using a wood one, you just need to know the weight of your object and then the weight of your object in your travel box. And with those two things, you can calculate using cushioning curve data, you can figure out or see precisely how much surface area you need, right? So if you've got an 8-inch wide travel box, we've got to know how wide that travel box is. If you've got a 10-inch wide travel box, that's more surface area, so the pads are going to shrink. If you've got a 4-inch wide travel box, that's less surface area, the pad's going to get bigger.
This is a very just detailed question of, you mentioned, sounded like a regen or something? Oh, sorry. What was the name of the material you mentioned that they use in Europe, and it's like the kind of that layer?
It's sold in the U.S. as Rebond.
Okay, yeah, all right,
Yep.
thanks.
And it's basically different urethane foams, different densities as waste, sort of shredded up into different sizes and then put between two sort of containing meshes. And because it's discontinuous and it's made up of little pieces with different densities, it doesn't transmit, it breaks up vibration transmissions. Yeah.
I think, do any of you actually build and pack crates? Anybody that's here? Because I think this is one of the problems is there's a gap between the research and the practitioners, and getting the information to the people who are actually building and packing crates or ordering crates is a really big problem. So Dale's working on this. The Art in Transit pre-session symposium at AIC is hoping to close this gap too, where scientists, engineers, and people who actually build and pack crates are going to be getting together to talk about this issue. But like I said, the CCI has a PAD-CAD calculator, so one of the things you guys can all do is make sure that you're asking for cushioning curves to be used when you're ordering crates. And if the companies that are building the crates don't know what they are, you can point them to the PAD-CAD, you can point them to Packin, you can point them to Dale, you can point them to the Getty, you can point them to me. There are a lot of people out there who can help navigate that. And you can also estimate the weight of objects based on what the material is and the dimensions too. It doesn't have to be an exact weight. Ideally, you have the exact weight, but just a ballpark will help. And the other thing I was going to say is we and the Getty and LACMA, we don't use polyurethane foam. We only use polyethylene foam for pads and a different material for insulation. We're still using like a polystyrene for insulation that's rigid. The Getty is using foam core for insulation a lot of times, and then just heavier wooden box inside box to help with insulation. But one of the products that I'm really excited to test that will replace Ethafoam as a cushioning material is a product called Fiber Flute that is made of compressed paperboard. It also has a cushioning curve, data, and it should be available worldwide because it's made by a global company called NEFAB. But they haven't pushed it out to a lot of places yet. It's available in Northern California, and it's something that if we get funded this fall, we will test it. There's also a company in Delaware that's making a product called Earth Crate that's 100% compostable, but it's only really designed for one-way use. So, but there's exciting things happening.
Yeah.
For now, we don't have any data on it yet.
And you know, from our experience, you'll ask, like I'll ask a crate, because we've used several crate makers, what's the density of your PU foam, right? What's the IFD? And what's the IFD of Ethafoam? And the answer is often, I don't know, it's what I can order. And that's a real problem regionally, is that there are only certain materials that crate makers can reliably get. And so you need to understand whether your crate makers make using Ethafoam 180, Ethafoam 220, right? Those things. It is not. Yeah, it's not easy. But I mean, we're probably doing everything that you all are doing. It's just trying to tweak it in ways that are going to get our crates to go through a 1-year exhibition cycle, and then come back. And after 1 year, I can tell you that, yeah, the foams are not performing the way they did in the beginning. Those cells have all been broken apart and don't function. So if we're thinking seriously about extending the time of exhibitions, right, which is a very green thing to do. I mean, I love this idea of, instead of going 12 to 15 weeks, let's go 30, let's go 45, let's go 55. The problem is that those foams aren't going to last. So that's where using a serviceable industrial material, I think, is a good alternative.
All right. Well, thank you, Dale. We appreciate it. We are going to wrap things up. We can certainly continue these conversations. I think, this is just the starting point. There's just the tip of the iceberg, a lot more to dive into.